During the Second World War, Allied air forces conducted tens of thousands of raids over Nazi-occupied Europe. However, with thousands of aircraft being shot down over occupied territory, pilots and airmen that were fortunate to bail out of their aircrafts were swiftly captured and sent to prisoner of war camps. Keen to return to Britain and take up the fight once more, many pilots attempted daring escapes, with the most notorious of all taking place on the night of March 24th-25th, 1944, from the Stalag Luft III POW camp. Located 100 miles southeast of Berlin, near the town of Zagan, which is now in modern-day Poland, the camp was run by the Luftwaffe as a POW camp for captured Allied airmen. The camp consisted of 5 compounds, which are separated into US Army Air Force and British RAF zones, with the British occupying the North Compound, from which the Great Escape would take place. Each compound consisted of 15 single-story huts, with 10 by 12 feet triple bunk rooms sleeping up to 15 POWs each. At its peak, the camp housed some 10,000 captured airmen, of which some 2,500 were RAF officers. Then, despite the cramped conditions, the camp boasted a library and theatre. However, Stalag Luft III wasn't meant to be a holiday camp. In fact, the Germans believed the camp to be almost escape-proof, due to several factors. Firstly, the camp was constructed on extremely sandy subsoil with a bright yellow colouring, thus making it easy to detect if discarded on the compound soil. Secondly, its sandy makeup made tunnelling difficult, as vast quantities of wood would have to be sourced to shore up the tunnel. In addition, huts were raised off the ground, making it easier for tunnel entrances to be spotted by guards. And finally, seismograph microphones were wired around the perimeter of the camp to detect the sounds of digging. It would seem, then, that the prisoners would have to sit out the rest of the war as comfortably as possible. In 1943, British and Commonwealth airmen were being held in the North Compound of the camp, and amongst them was RAF Squadron Leader Roger Bushell. Bushell was head of the Escape Committee and went by the codename of Big X, and in March of that year he called a meeting to discuss the most ambitious escape plan of the entire war. The plan was to simultaneously dig 3 tunnels, codenamed Tom, Dick and Harry, which would run under the North Compound and into the forest surrounding the camp. Having 3 tunnels under construction at once gave the escapees the advantage of surprise, as they believed that should one tunnel be discovered, then the Germans would scarcely imagine that another 2 would also be in progress. However, digging 3 tunnels at once wasn't the aspect of the plan that shocked the escape committee the most. Instead, it was the scope of the escape Big X had planned. Throughout the war, previous escape attempts had involved up to 20 men, but in this case, Big X aimed to get 200 men out at once, all wearing civilian clothing and all carrying forged papers and escape tools. The escape attempt was incredibly ambitious and would require the work of 600 prisoners of war to pull it off. But despite their reservations, the committee approved the plan, and Big X and his team went to work. Tom began in Hut 123 and extended west into the forest. Dick, whose entrance was hidden in a drain sump of a washroom, would also head west out of Hut 122, and finally, Harry, whose entrance was covered by a stove, began in Hut 104 and would head north into the forest. To minimize the chance of detection by the seismographs, each tunnel was dug 30 feet below the surface and were approximately 2 square feet in size, with several larger chambers dug to house air pumps and staging posts along their length. To shore up the walls and roof, some 4,000 bedboards, 90 double bunks, and 76 benches were stripped down and the wood used as supports. Picks and shovels were fashioned out of clim cans that could be found in Red Cross parcels. However, the most extraordinary use of the cans was in the vast ventilation systems that supplied air to the prisoners in the tunnels. Candles were fashioned by skimming the fat off the top of soup, and wicks were made from old worn cloth. As the tunnels ventured even further under the compound, 1,000 feet of electric wire was stolen from the Germans and coupled to a series of lights to light the tunnels, and the introduction of a small railcar system sped up the movement of sand from the digging faces. However, the escapees still faced the enormous task of disposing the huge quantities of soil. With its yellow color, the soil couldn't simply be dumped on top of the compound soil, but instead it would have to be mixed in. Ingeniously, to solve the problem, prisoners wore small pouches inside their trousers filled with tunnel soil, and from the holes in their pockets they could release the holding pins on the pouches and mix the tunnel dirt into the compound soil with their feet. To draw less attention, prisoners often dumped the soil in small gardens that they could tend to. As one prisoner released the soil, the other quickly mixed it in, whilst acting as if they were in conversation. It's estimated that some 25,000 trips were made by prisoners to dispose of the soil from the 3 tunnels. However, German camp commanders were aware that something was going on, but were unable to discover the tunnels. Unfortunately, in late 1943, a camp extension was built directly above the planned exit for Dick, and this led to the tunnel being filled up with excess soil from Tom and Harry, as well as being used as a storage room for supplies and the vast amount of escaped clothing. Despite having some 600 prisoners working around the clock, not all the required items for the planned escape could be found within the camp. Therefore, the escapees relied on a whole enterprise of friendly guards who were anti-Nazi and cooperated by supplying railway timetables, maps, papers, and genuine civilian clothing, which were crucial to the success of the plan. As the winter of 1943 set in, regular snowfall made it increasingly difficult to dispose of the tunnel soil, and it wasn't long before German guards noticed that prisoners who would dispose in soil were frequently seen leaving Hut 1, 2, 3. Immediately, the guards searched the hut and found Tom. After discovering it, the Germans caved in the tunnel, and as a precaution, work on Harry ceased until the snows had passed. In January 1944, work on Harry resumed, and by March the tunnel was completed. The escape had been planned for that summer, but with increased efforts by Germans to detect escape attempts, the decision was made to go as soon as possible. Out of the 600 prisoners who had worked on the tunnels, only 200 could be included in the escape itself, due to the number of escape kits and clothing available. These fortunate 200 were subsequently split into 2 groups. The first group of 100, known as the serial offenders, included those men who spoke fluent German, had a history of escapes, or put in the most work in the tunnels. The second group of 100, known as the hard asses, who spoke little or no German and were only equipped with basic escape tools, were thought to have less chance of success and would only travel by night to avoid contact with the Germans. Finally, on the moonless night of Friday the 24th of March 1944, the escape attempt began. Almost immediately the escapees encountered their first setback, as the exit trapdoor from Harry was found to be frozen shut by the snowy conditions above. Freeing the door took up valuable time, delaying the escape by an hour and a half. But even as the door was freed, a second setback was soon discovered, as the first man out at 10:30 p.m. emerged just short of the tree line and in sight of a guard tower. Unlike in the 1963 movie, the temperature on the escape night was below freezing, and heavy snow covered the ground, meaning that escapees would leave a noticeable imprint that the guards would easily spot should they scout the edge of the forest. Therefore, to avoid German sentries, it was decided that only 10 men could get out per hour, rather than the planned 1 per minute, to allow fresh snow to cover their tracks. To add to the mayhem, an Allied air raid caused the camp's electric supply to be switched off, cutting the lights to the tunnel, and at 1 a.m. a section of the tunnel collapsed and had to be repaired, further slowing down the escape. With this slower rate of progress, it was decided that only the first 100 men could make it out before daybreak. Therefore, the hard asses changed back into their RAF uniforms and returned to their huts. Despite these setbacks, miraculously, 76 men managed to get out through the tunnel until at 4:55 a.m. the 77th man was spotted emerging from the trapdoor by a German sentry. Immediately all hell broke loose in the camp, and the guards frantically began searching the huts for the tunnel entrance. Fortunately, Hut 104 was one of the last to be searched, allowing the remaining escapees plenty of time to burn any forged documents. Despite using guard dogs and conducting a rigorous search, the Germans were unable to find the tunnel entrance until they sent a guard to crawl back through the tunnel from the exit trap, and when he began calling from under Hut 104, the POWs let him out, finally revealing the tunnel entrance. Those who did escape made their way through the forest towards the Ghan train station. However, many failed to find the station entrance during the blackout, and subsequently missed the night trains, forcing them to either risk waiting for the morning train or to walk across country. Those who waited were quickly caught by the legions of German soldiers now hunting them down, and those who chose to take their chances on foot were forced to stick to the roads, as 5-foot snowdrifts made cross-country trekking almost impossible. Thus, it wasn't long before the Germans rounded up the escaped POWs, and of the 76 who got out, 73 were recaptured. After learning of the mass escape, Adolf Hitler was furious and initially ordered the execution of all recaptured POWs. However, fearing reprisal against German POWs in Allied hands, German High Command tried to convince him otherwise. However, Hitler eventually ordered Himmler and the SS to execute more than half of all escapees, and thus 50 of the recaptured 73 POWs were murdered by the Nazis. Of the remaining 23 recaptured POWs, 17 were returned to Stalag Luft III, 2 were sent to Colditz Castle, and 4 were sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Despite the swift and barbaric recapture of 73 POWs by the Nazis, 3 did manage to pull off home runs. 2 Norwegian RAF pilots, by the names of Per Bergsland and Jens Müller, escaped together and made it to neutral Sweden by train and boat with the help of friendly Swedish sailors. The final successful escapee was a Dutch RAF pilot by the name of Bran van der Stok, who made his way through occupied Europe and with the help of the resistance found safety at the British consulate in Spain. After the war, RAF Special Investigations Branch launched a manhunt of German personnel who were responsible for the mass execution of the escapees. As a result, a number of Gestapo and SS personnel were convicted of war crimes at the Nuremberg trials and sentenced to execution or life imprisonment. Today, the site of Stalag Luft III is now a museum, and a memorial dedicated to the 50 can be found on the road to the Ghan, serving as a reminder that the heroic escape shall never be forgotten. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to check out more videos on the Second World War, then click the link on screen to explore the Battle of Iwo Jima.